Corn, buy fresh, locally grown corn. 3 corbas an ear. How can I support my family if my corn won't sell? Graciela, will you buy my corn?
I'm sorry, Ronaldo, but your corn is too expensive. I can get cheaper corn elsewhere. I can barely afford enough food to feed my family as it is. The Maquilas don't pay very high wages.
But I can't afford to sell my corn any cheaper. The cost of growing my corn is already higher than what I make selling it.
Corn, 1 cordoba, straight from the U.S.
Times have always been hard for us small farmers. Throughout the centuries, we have been pushed to even smaller plots of land. And now with big corporations to compete with and the passage of CAFTA, it's nearly impossible for us to make a living.
CAFTA! The Central American Free Trade Agreement, created to make it easier for our corporations to exploit Central America. It is based on the economic theories of neoliberalism, which we are currently promoting around the world. Here are a few basic principles of neoliberalism, namely free market, foreign investment, and privatization. Basically, it's about giving power to the big guys to make more products on a bigger scale, with fewer laws to get in the way. There's no room for small guys in the new system. That's because the big guys are more productive and cause economic growth and development. Let's start with the idea of free market. Free market is all about creating a market that gives free rein to corporations to do the business they want to do, without nasty stuff like environmental protection laws, labor rights laws, tariffs, and subsidies to get in the way.
Hey man, hold it right there. What the heck are tariffs and subsidies?
A tariff is a tax that the government produces on imported products.
So if I send my corn to Nicaragua, the government could put a tax on it to make it more expensive.
15% tax on incoming corn.
Corn, buy fresh, locally grown corn. With the price of imported corn taxed, Nicaraguan farmers can sell their corn.
But what about subsidies?
A subsidy is money paid to a company or organization by the government in order to help it out if it ain't doing so well. You know, give a boost to the economy.
Before free trade, I paid subsidies to my small farmers.
Not anymore. With free trade, all these artificial government barriers to trade are gone. Now with everyone can compete on an even playing field.
But how is that a level playing field? There is no way that Nicaraguan farmers can compete with U.S. agricultural corporations like Monsanto. They have huge plantations, workers, advanced technology, and a lot more money. Plus, the government still pays their corporations subsidies, even though doing so violates their free trade agreements, and the corporations don't need any more money. Thus, the U.S. agricultural corporations are getting paid by the U.S. government to overproduce.
I have more corn than I can convince customers to buy. What should I do with it? Do you have a solution, dear Uncle Sam?
You can always dump it on the Central American market, sell it for real cheap. Be considered like a gift. Show our neighbors down south how nice we are. Give us a good name.
Corn! I would like to buy some corn.
I can't compete with this. No one will buy my corn.
Well, that means that Nicaragua must not be very efficient at producing corn, so maybe you should stop growing corn and let the U.S. do it. Neoliberalism is all about producing more efficiently. It means that whoever can produce something the most efficiently should make just that, in vast quantity. Those who can't produce that thing eventually disappear, or make what they can make most efficiently. Then everyone functions in harmony, producing what they produce best, and everyone can trade to get what they need.
Dude, that totally all went over my head.
There are two territories. Territory 1 is skilled at growing onions, but does miserably at raising chickens. Territory 2, on the other hand, has a booming business in chickens, but is struggling on the onion market. The logical solution would be for Territory 1 to stop raising chickens, Territory 2 to quit growing onions, and the two of them trade. A country's comparative advantage is a product that is easiest and cheapest for that country to produce. The idea here is that each country focuses production on one or two crops and decreases production on everything else. That way each country makes what is cheapest and easiest for it to make, then can trade with other countries for what it needs.
No, it is not that simple. That idea might work for countries on the same level, but like I said, Nicaragua and the U.S. are on completely different levels. And you can't tell us to stop growing corn. That's our livelihood, our culture, our way of life. Imagine what a bad idea it is to tell a country to stop producing everything except one or two things. What happens when the market collapses on that crop? I remember the coffee crisis.
In 1998, the production cost of a 100-pound bag of coffee was $70. The sales price was $110.
There's not much coffee on the world market. Hey, Nicaragua, why don't you tell your farmers to focus all their efforts on producing coffee? It's a profitable crop to be growing right now, and will bring in a lot of income. Hey, Vietnam, why don't you tell your farmers to start growing coffee? It'll bring in a lot of money. Hey, Brazil, you have a lot of coffee stored up you haven't sold yet. Coffee is scarce on the world market right now. Why don't you start selling your coffee on the world market?
Hear ye, all small farmers of Nicaragua. The U.S. has kindly recommended that we focus all our production on growing coffee and limit production of anything else. Our farmers should focus all their efforts on producing coffee. There isn't much coffee being produced, so the price for coffee is high. Growing coffee will bring in a lot of money.
The government mandates that we grow coffee, and I hope it helps like they promise. This might just be the turnaround I've been hoping for.
Eventually, coffee flooded the world market, and the price dropped. In 2001, it still cost $70 to produce a 100-pound bag of coffee, but it only sold for $43. That means that it costed $27 to produce a 100-pound bag of coffee. Because of the coffee crisis, 540,000 farm workers lost their jobs. Many had to migrate, and several starved.
I'm ruined. I am losing money by growing coffee. Comparative advantage doesn't work, U.S.
Obviously, coffee isn't Nicaragua's comparative advantage.
Then what is?
Cheap labor. Central America has a huge amount of people in need of a job who are willing to work for extremely low wages. The world is no longer a place for small farmers and small businesses. The economy works best when the most efficient producers are making, trading, and selling everything. And in today's world, they are the big corporations. In Central America, the winners are the agricultural corporations with big plantations and other corporations that build factories there. This brings us to another component of free trade, foreign investment. With all this cheap labor, Central America is a perfect market for multinational corporations to prosper.
But then what happens to us? I can't compete with big agricultural corporations.
If you can't beat them, join them.
Yolanda, Dixon, Margyni. I have to sell the farm. We can't make enough money to keep it up anymore.
Where will we go, Daddy?
We'll have to find work on a plantation.
Okay, we'll hire you to work on our plantation. This plantation grows coffee for Starbucks, Nestle, Maxwell, and Folgers. You can stay in that shack over there. We start work at 5 a.m. with a break for lunch and water rations at 4 p.m. Firewood rations for cooking, food, are Tuesday and Thursday evenings. You have to dig 400 holes a day for plants or you won't get paid. The holes have to be 15 inches deep and 8 inches wide. Okay, get to work.
I'm thirsty.
Keep working.
But I'll pass out if I don't get water.
Do you want to get fired? "4 p.m., time for water rations. Not you. You haven't dug 400 holes yet. Keep working." Hey, you can't collect firewood. Wait for rations tomorrow. Today is Monday. Rations aren't until Tuesday.
But without firewood to cook our food, we won't be able to eat.
Tough. Be glad you have a place to live at all.
Daddy, I need to buy a new book for my literature class. The teacher says I won't pass without it.
Dixon, I can barely afford food for the family. We have no land. How can I afford a book? Listen, I don't think the family can afford to have you in school anymore. We need more hands working to gain more money.
But Daddy, I don't want to drop out of school.
I'm sorry, my son, but I don't see any other way.
Ronaldo, this job is horrible. We don't get water until 4, and today when I tried to collect firewood to cook our supper, the overseer took it from me and burned it. They only give out firewood twice a week. I can't imagine living like this.
What else can we do? We don't have the farm anymore. The only place left is in the city, working in a Maquila. I've heard stories about the Maquilas from Graciela, and I don't think you'd want to live there.
Coffee plantations aren't the only form of foreign investment. There are other companies that build factories called Maquilas and free trade zones. Many U.S. companies are outsourcing jobs to countries like Nicaragua.
We build an industry park called a free trade zone, and then a foreign company comes and builds a factory. We don't charge them any taxes because we want to attract them here. If they can make more money somewhere else, they will go there. Companies have been shutting down their factories and moving them to China, where labor costs are even lower. All the workers here then lose their jobs. We need the jobs.
But they're horrible jobs. I work in a Maquila, and they don't even treat me like a human being. To them, I'm just a machine to do their work for them. They pay me as little as possible and pocket the rest.
Thus begins what is known as the race to the bottom. Companies are competing for customers, and so they offer lower and lower prices and pay their workers less and less.
And countries compete for foreign investment, making themselves more open and accessible to the companies. We ignore violations of labor laws and the like. Either that or they leave. Nicaragua is an attractive place for companies to build factories. We're close to the U.S., and we have a huge workforce and a low labor cost. In Costa Rica, workers have to be paid a whopping $2 an hour. Here, it's just 39 cents.
Senor, I am sick this morning. Can I please have time off to go to the clinic?
No, if you want time off, you can leave.
But it was this factory that got me sick. The sanitary conditions here are horrible. The food sold by the cafeterias and bars is contaminated. We've been getting gastritis from it, and our health insurance...
Did you hear me the first time? Don't talk back to me, or you'll lose your job. The factory isn't responsible for workers' illnesses. But tell me something. Are you sure that you're sick? So you know what happens to workers that are sick. We can't have them on the job. Are you really sick?
No, senor. I'm fine.
Hurry up, pigs!
The way they treat us here in the Maquilas is horrendous. But to feed my children, I'll put up with almost anything. I have a 17-year-old son who is studying at a university and a 13-year-old daughter in high school. They're supposed to follow labor rights laws, but they can get away with almost anything because there are so many Nicaraguans looking for a job.
According to Nicaraguan labor law, workers should have safe and sanitary facilities, respectful treatment, and health insurance coverage from the company they work for.
But of course we don't get any of that. I'm just glad my children aren't sick right now. We're supposed to get 6 days off for sick children, but of course they'd never let us.
Oi! Today an inspector from the company who owns this factory is coming to see if the factory meets their standards. That means we need to clean this place up and give him a good impression. If any of you breathes a word of complaint about the conditions here, you'll be fired. Understand?
This means there will be toilet paper and soap in the bathrooms today.
Okay, you then. Your job is to clean the workers' bathrooms. And you clean the drinking fountains. We're gonna need a few workers to go into the septic tanks to clean them out. You, and you. Go clean the septic tanks. You've done it before, you know where they are. Everyone needs to be done in half an hour.
Where's Susana today? I don't see her.
She got fired. They found out she was pregnant.
We're supposed to get 3 months of paid maternity leave. That's what the law says.
You think they would give us that? Yeah, right. They don't care about us. They only care about earning money. To them, we're just machines to do their work.
You two shut up!
Senor, it's 12 o'clock. That's what time we get out on Saturdays.
No one's leaving yet. We haven't produced enough this month. We have to fulfill the company's quota. Keep working.
Senor, I left my stove on at home. Can I please go home and turn it off?
No one's leaving. Close the gates. You stupid woman, you messed up that shirt. One more mistake like that and you're fired. Okay, the workday is over now. The gates are open. Everyone go home.
They won't pay us for the time we worked that wasn't official hours. That's not the first time they forced us to work overtime, and they make us come to work on Sundays, even though we're not supposed to.
Nicaraguan labor law says that overtime work must be voluntary, and the maximum amount allowed is 3 hours a day and 9 hours a week. Also, overtime has to be paid double.
They never pay us for working overtime, and they force us to do it way more often than that. I've decided to join a union and demand fair treatment.
A union is an organized group of workers who work to ensure labor rights and fair working conditions. Unions have always had a hard time in Nicaragua. For example, at a company called Presitex, 6 workers made a union and started to make a collective bargaining agreement.
It is against the law to fire a worker for being in a union.
I have to fire these workers. They're low in production levels, and I can't put up with it. Ministry of Labor, if I can't fire these workers, I will close this factory and leave Nicaragua. You will lose precious jobs.
We can't afford to lose jobs. If you fire the workers, we won't say anything.
Once workers are fired for being in a union, they're blacklisted, meaning that they are put on a list so that no one in the free trade zone hires them.
Ever since I joined the union, I've been harassed and treated horribly at work. The first day I went in and none of my coworkers were talking to me. Marta, why won't anyone talk to me?
The supervisors told us not to talk to you, or we might get fired. They said that you're dangerous.
Hey, shut up, you two.
Later, I received a paper from my line of production. Be careful. They're going to take you out as a thief. But I've never robbed anything. I've worked at this company for 10 years, and I have a perfect labor record. Then I started getting telephone threats that I would be beat up or killed. At work, I usually get a bonus every Monday, but they stopped giving it to me. When everyone's salaries were raised, mine stayed the same. I had a nervous breakdown and was vomiting, so I decided to go to the hospital. The doctor gave me sleeping pills, but I couldn't take them because of work. I'm scared to go to work every day, but I have to for my children.
You're not welcome here anymore. Go home.
But this is my job!
I'm firing you. Now leave.
I left my belongings in the factory. Please let me go in and get them.
Get out of here or I'll call security.
I just want to go in and get my belongings.
Security!
Help! Let me go!
Shut up and stop moving, or we'll cue you.
I don't know what I'm going to do now. I need a job so that I can feed my children, but it's hard to get a job in other factories because they hire 18-year-olds.
On average, out of the workers in free trade zones, 80% are women, 90% are young, and 80% of the women are single mothers.
Isn't CAFTA just great? Nicaragua's doing a whole lot better with increased free trade zones and factories. The amount of exports has gone up exponentially. Nicaragua is producing so much more. Look at these numbers. Look at the amount of money pouring into Nicaragua's economy. You can't argue with numbers. Numbers are cold.
But the way the numbers are presented is skewed. This doesn't show where the money's going. Because of the increased number of factories, we are producing and exporting more goods. But the money from the exports goes right back into the factories, which are owned by foreign companies. Very little of it goes to the Nicaraguans. And the competition that comes from these big companies shuts down small businesses owned by Nicaraguans so they can't earn enough money.
Okay, moving on to the third component of free trade, which is privatization. This means that the country's public services, such as electricity, education, healthcare, telephones, banks, and water, should be privately owned by corporations instead of publicly owned by the government. This is good because the government doesn't have any incentive to keep its industries efficient. The corporations with competition do. The government isn't a good engine for economic growth. Selling these will provide money for the government.
But parceling off our precious resources to foreign superpowers is even worse. When that happens, we had to pay for resources that belong to the earth. Here in Nicaragua, we felt the full effects of when electricity was privatized. It's now privately owned by the company Unión Fenosa.
Electricity was privatized in Nicaragua in 2000 when it was sold to the company Unión Fenosa.
It was worth $400 million, but they claimed it was only worth $250 million. In the end, they bought it for just $115 million. The government didn't even get much money out of it. Also, the government gets less income now and can't spend as much on services for the people.
Now, electricity costs more and is lower quality. Union Fenosa raised the price because they're the only electricity provider for the whole country. Since they have no competition, they can charge whatever price they want and don't have to worry about providing decent services. Blackouts happen frequently. Once, the electricity in our neighborhood went out for 11 days.
Some of the state banks have been privatized. At first, they gave low-interest loans to farmers, but then they raised the interest on the loans to 20 or 25%, making small farmers incredibly vulnerable.
Privatization is devastating because so much money is lost to a foreign entity. And because we had to pay for resources that are concentrated in someone else's hands when they rightfully belong to the earth and the people.
Why does the government let all this happen? Why can't you guys just say no to privatization and free trade? What's going on?
Part of the reason we have to follow someone else's conditions is because of the structural adjustment programs.
The what? Dude, no one knows what that is.
It starts with Nicaragua's tremendous national debt. It all started back in the 1970s. We're in the middle of a world economic recession. The prices of our exports are going down, and we're losing money from trading rather than gaining money.
Guys, you should raise the price of oil. You'll get tons of money coming into your banks.
Yeah, good idea.
Ooh,
Great.
Yeah.
With oil prices rising, we're losing even more money.
Now that we have all this money, we should invest it somehow. Let's offer loans to developing countries. They're struggling to get by. Hey, Nicaragua, would you like a loan with a low interest rate?
Yes, we're desperate for any help we can get. Unfortunately, no one watched what happened to the money from the loans, and most of it was taken by the cruel dictator Anastasio Somoza, who held power in Nicaragua for many years. This happened in many of the developing countries that received loans. Nicaragua borrowed more and more throughout the decade.
This is a good time to introduce the IMF and the World Bank, which facilitate the giving of loans to third world countries. They were both created in 1944 in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire.
I'm the World Bank. My original purpose was to provide money for rebuilding Europe after World War II. In 1961, after the U.S. and other developed countries realized that developing nations weren't able to borrow money under the laws that existed then, they created the International Development Association, which is a part of me. Now, I have over 170 member countries. 78 of these countries borrow money. My headquarters are in Washington, D.C. The more money that a country gives to the World Bank, the more voting power that country has.
I give the most money, which means that I get 17.6% of the votes. This means that I have veto power to make sure that any loan I don't like doesn't happen.
I'm the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. I was made to monitor money exchange rates and cut down trade barriers between countries that are members of me. I have a reserve of money that countries with money problems can use to keep trade going. My headquarters are in Washington, D.C. My voting power is also based on money. More than 40% of the voting power is in the hands of 5 countries.
I have 17% of the votes on the executive board.
When my buddy the IMF and I talk, please realize that we represent the representatives of our member nations. We are not one individual.
Okay, now that you know that, we can get back to the story. From 1980 to 1982, there was a world economic recession. The prices on the world market of agricultural products dropped dramatically, and Latin America lost 1/3 of its income, stopping economic growth.
We need money because we're losing money through trading. We're raising the interest rate on loans from 8% to 20%.
That's a good idea. We're raising our interest rates too.
Great, we need as much as we can get.
Our rates are going up.
What are we going to do? We have to take out loans just to pay the interest on our debts from other loans.
We can't do this anymore. We officially declare that we will not be able to pay off our debts. We're going to stop making these payments because the debt is impossible to pay.
What are we going to do? What if all the other countries that are getting loans decide to do the same thing? We can't have that happen.
We created what we named the Washington Consensus. It is an archetype of an economic system using free trade. We should tell the countries that borrow money that in order to be given loans, they have to modify their economies to take away all barriers of trade. That will make them easier to exploit. But we'll say that it will prevent them from being unable to pay back loans like Mexico.
I will give them conditions they have to fulfill in order to receive a loan. They will be called the Structural Adjustment Programs, or SAPs.
Ooh, offer long payback lengths that are attached to loans, and they have also low interest rates. That will make them even more enticing.
Meanwhile, we have had to borrow more and more money, falling deeper and deeper into debt. We have paid back the original amount we borrowed many times, but we are still paying interest on the interest. The debt is impossible to pay. With the SAPs, we have had to change our economy in ways that make it even worse for our people.
If you don't follow the SAPs, we will tell all the countries that now give you loans that they shouldn't. Most countries listen to us about which countries they should lend to. We have credibility. Let me explain the basics of the SAPs. Firstly, we believe that the government's size should be decreased because the private companies are better for the economy. Our SAPs force countries' governments to sell their public companies to global corporations and fire state workers.
Because the SAPs, we have been told to privatize our telecommunications, electricity, water, education, and healthcare. But you saw how harmful it was to sell off electricity. Without these companies, the government has less money to spend on services for the people and has to take out more loans. Also, we have had to fire thousands of public workers.
Secondly, we are trying to ensure that the governments of these developing countries don't spend more than what they make. To do this, our SAPs mandate that these countries raise taxes and cut spending.
Our sales taxes are higher than any others in Central America, and the people can't pay them. We have also been forced to cut spending for healthcare, education, and the environment because the government doesn't get any income from them.
Finally, through the SAPs, we are trying to create free market economies by cutting out regulations and things that get in the way of trade, such as tariffs, subsidies, labor rights, and environmental laws.
So this is one of the reasons why all this is happening. Even if the government is trying to help the common people, we have little power in the face of the US, the IMF, and the World Bank. And since CAFTA was signed, this free market system has become even more dominant. The future is bleak for Nicaragua.
But what kind of hope does that leave for me and my family? My children are getting no education, and we are struggling to get by. Dixon, is there something you wanted to ask?
Daddy, I've made up my mind. I'm going to the U.S. to find a job.
But, are you sure? We need you to work on the plantation.
Dixon, I don't want you to go. What if you get lost? What if you don't make it? I don't want to split up the family. We might never see each other again.
No, I'm going, and nothing you can say will change my mind. They'll make more money in the U.S. than we're making here, and I can send the extra money home, so you will be better off. We're getting nowhere here. We'll probably die on the plantation. I have to go to the U.S.
Please be safe, my son. I wish it didn't have to be this way.
Dixon, I've heard horrible stories about people dying trying to cross the border. Please reconsider. I'll miss you terribly.
I'll miss you too, but I'm going to create my future. Goodbye, Mother. Goodbye, Father. Goodbye, Margyni.
Goodbye, Dixon.
Brothers and sisters in America, my son is coming to live in your country. I entrust him to your care. How will he be treated here? What is the story of his future? The decision is yours.